Welcome to the Oh So Spurs Finance Special. Today we're going to give you a quick summary of Spurs' finance to date, what that Europa League win means for our summer transfer budgets, along with the forecast UEFA Champions League revenue, and what we need to do this summer based on those changes and the summary of the revenues. And to help me with it all today, we have Nick, Raj, and Ben, who have all worked or are working in various roles within finance, be that in the corporate world or be that in one of these cases working as an economist in the past as well. So, Ben, we were going to start with you on the summary of where we are to date, right, financially, before we kick off with how the UEFA Europa League win has kind of impacted our finances moving forward.
Yeah, I was just going to give a brief summary of sort of our financial health before that win in Bilbao, just so that people are sort of aware of where we're coming from, really. So a bit of a recap of the accounts that came out last summer, which cover the period for last season, and then a few of the factors we need to consider since, just to give people a bit of a feel for, how well or not well we were doing. And then obviously the guys are going to take us through, the impact of that win and what it does for us. So yeah, bear with me, I'll rattle through. But basically the accounts last summer were no real surprise. The revenue was down, as you would expect, no Champions League, and the costs were down as a result of holding less events. We sort of compensated for that from better commercial revenues through the stadium, through events, also through selling Kane. So everything was down. None of that was a huge surprise. A few bits that we did call out in one of the previous pods were the wage bill, having climbed every year since 2016, I think it was. It dipped for the first time, so it went from around 250 million to around 220. But the transfer spend continued, and that's where we insulate ourselves a little bit. So our average gross spend for the last 5 years averages around 166 million, and that's obviously your pure fees going out. Our net spend, so less the fees coming in, is around 128 million a season for the last 5 years. So we've managed to continue to spend. Our amortization bill, as a result, went up. So the amount of money we have to sort of cater for each season for players we've already bought, that's around 136 million as of last summer. And our transfer fees owed bill is very high. So we do owe a lot of money. We owe 37 million. We're owed about 58 million. So our net transfer bill as of last summer was about 280 million. As I say, growth in commercial revenues continued. We sold Kane, which helped. So we're in an okay position financially. It wasn't really positive, it wasn't really negative. We were sort of getting by without European competition revenue, mainly thanks to the stadium, really, and the Kane sale of a couple others like Harry Winks. That allowed us to continue spending. But what the accounts, I think, really underlined was how important European competition revenue is for us, because while we're more insulated than clubs like Chelsea or Villa, who without Europe have to look for PSR loopholes, have to do sell to buy, we're not in that position. But what it does do is mean our spending becomes limited. And I think really approaching this summer, we would have seen some belt tightening probably, had it not been for the Europa League, which the guys will come on to the details of. Just a couple of quick things to call out since those accounts. So obviously player trading, some of the players we bought came in after June last year. So that those accounts include players up to Archie Gray, I think, who snuck in June. But after that, so players like Solanke, Odebert, Bergvall, Kinski, they all came in post June. So they obviously won't have been factored into those accounts, and will have since. We've tanked in the league. The league costs about 2.9 million per position. So that drop from 5th to 17th will mean our merit payments go down by 30 million odd, just over. Thankfully, that's obviously offset now by the European revenue, details to follow. And also we had 10 extra home games. So we had the 7 Europa League home games plus 3 games in the Carabao, which were all pretty good games. Yeah, they were Man United, Man City, Liverpool. So we would have made 3 to 5 million probably for each of those games. So there's a few factors since. But as I say, to my mind, we would have had some belt tightening had we not won that game in Bilbao, because of the high transfers owed, the sort of okay financial situation, and the reliance on European revenue, which would have meant, had we lost, a second season in 3 out of Europe. So that's really where we were coming up to this summer. It was a very, very important game for us for more than just winning a cup. But I think I'm handing over to Nick, who's going to sort of take us through what exactly that means both this season and next.
Thanks, Ben. And yeah, we'll pass over to Nick. And if you you may recognize Ben from going on other podcasts as well, like the Fighting Cock, covering, often when the annual statements come out, Ben, your phone's normally popping off, isn't it?
Busy week or
pop
two,
in,
yeah.
to give people a hand on deciphering what it means. But you were touching it there. We're going to pass over to Nick, but the importance, Nick, as well, of having this new stadium enables us to make more of these cup competitions, right? Because we can generate much more money just from simply playing a game, prize money or not. But anyway, I'll let you go with the summary of what the Europa League meant for us financially.
Yeah. So thanks very much for having me again, Jim. Great to be here. I can't believe it, just over a week ago, I was recovering from our victory in Bilbao, which was, honest to be there, was fantastic amongst your friends and see us lift that cup. But the first thing people asked me straight afterwards was, come on, Nick, you look at the numbers. How much is this really worth to us? And I've been tracking it a little bit as we go. So we're quite fortunate in the UEFA like to publish the information about what each win, each draw, each participation is worth. So they, broadly speaking, divide up the prize money into three components. The first one is just participation. So you're absolutely guaranteed income for appearing in the Europa League. Every single club gets that. That's worth about 4.3 million euros. I'll stick with euros for now, and then we'll convert to sterling later just to make it consistent and easy for everyone, but roughly about 4 million. So that's what we get straight off the bat. The second one is just comprises of prize money. So how many victories? So you get income for every victory that you get, which is good. So the more you win, the more money we get. That's worth about 450,000 euros, and every draw is worth about 150,000 euros. So it's better to win. And it's better to get points on the board. Then we also get rewarded for league rank. So the higher up you come, the more you get in terms of your league rank. So because we finished fourth overall in the Europa League, our performance was really good. That was worth about K to us. 75k per place. And then because we were right near the top, that totals out at about 2.5 million euros. Again, so top 8 qualification we made, so we get a bonus for that, and then all the way through to winning the Europa League. So overall, we believe that prize money, having calculated everything, and it's all up available on UEFA's website if anyone wants to review and check, we believe that overall the prize money was roughly, when you convert it to sterling, was about 28 million in terms of prize money. So fantastic news for that. There's also this brilliant bonus that we qualify for the European Super Cup. Again, that on its own is worth 4 million euros, or roughly about 3.36 million. So again, a fantastic bonus to get. So we will be appearing in that in August. And then, as Ben's mentioned, and you sort of set us up with that, Jim, is that the income that we get from gate receipts. So the fact that we're able to fill out a stadium. So, I've seen a few debates around the pricing for tickets, which is interesting. I think broadly speaking, Tottenham tended to keep the pricing sort of relatively competitive. So roughly about £30-35 per ticket, except for when we started to get to the latter stages, quarterfinals, semi-finals, we just see an uptick. It's very difficult to know exactly what that is because you don't know where all the ticket sales are. But if we take a broad average of what the ticket price is across the stadium, and then using the attendance that we had, sort of minus the away fans, I think we're roughly around the sort of 17 million number in terms of gate receipts. Now, huge caveat is that that's not all income, because we know that there's significant costs for opening the stadium. We've got to pay all the staff that work there, all the stewards, all the guys that serve us food and drink, and there's all the usual OPEX of utility costs and everything like that. So take that with a pinch of salt. We do need to apply those additional costs. We'll see those, as Ben mentioned, come through the accounts when we report in the future. But overall, I think if we want to take both the ticket sales, we want to take all the prize money, our appearance in the Super League, then I think that we would be looking at a total income of about 48.9 million for our Europa Cup success.
Wow. But something we have to factor as well in there, isn't it? It's the bonuses for the players are going to receive for now qualifying for the Champions League, for scoring extra goals, for keeping extra clean sheets, all these things. People often look at the prize money and go, wow, that's great, extra 50 million quid in the kitty. And it's like, well, we might have paid Heung-Min Son 5 million in an agreement in his contract that if he won a trophy, we don't know what these agreements are. So there is some ifs and buts, but it's no small amount of money. 50
Absolutely.
Million, over an amortized player, that's 250 million pounds worth of transfer budget if that had been pure profit, as an example. So even if it's only 10 million pounds pure profit, that could be a 50 million pounds extra into the transfer budget, hypothetically. Although, as was said before on the pod, transfer budget and wages, they're all kind of one big cost. You don't want to separate these things, but we'll get on that later.
I think we'd be delighted as well that all those players got a bonus, especially for the reasons that it's being paid. I think as well, I mean, it's a good point. What we don't tend to see, I think there's a lot of resources out there that talk about the wages that some of our players get. Most of it, I think you'll find, is a load of rubbish. It's very difficult to find out exactly what players get paid. But bonuses is like footballers are highly incentivised, not just at Tottenham, but all Premier League clubs. And that's one of the things that we don't tend to see until we get the annual accounts come through at the end in terms of how much players have been paid. But you're right, Jim, the bonus pool for players, not just for the Europa League, but across the season would have been very significant, and absolutely delighted that they've all got a share in winning the Europa League bonus.
Yes. And also it's another income there potentially is you've won a trophy, you might be able to command more for sponsors moving forward. You may have, Man United on the reverse who lost that final. I saw a piece saying that they've actually lost money from being in the Europa League because they've lost sponsorships for not qualifying for Europe next year by losing that, which has had a big impact on their finances. They've had to pay players big bonuses for getting to the final itself. The travel costs were enormous. All these other things have come into play, and they've actually come out of it. Technically, they've lost money. Although it's misleading because not getting a renewal for a sponsorship isn't like you've lost money for being in the competition. But anyway, the Champions League, we look forward to what money this brings, though, guys. That's where the real honey is made, right? Financially, even though the Europa League is not to be sniffed at. Did you guys want to touch a little bit on what that means for us? Income-wise, looking forward?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one. One of the things that we've omitted to talk about is the fact that winning the Europa League means that we get Champions League participation. And again, that's divided up into three pillars, one of which is participation. So if we just lost every single game, crashed out, finished bottom of the league next season, we still get around about 18.6 million euros for doing so. There's also something called a value pillar, which I didn't really talk about much in terms of the Europa, which is really difficult. If any of our listeners can work this out and get in touch with us, I'd be delighted. But it's a little bit of a rabbit hole. But basically, this is in old money, this is the way that the coefficient works. So, for example, there will be European and non-European broadcasters that pick up the Champions League, and whatever the split is, then certain teams get a share of whatever that commercial revenue is. It's very difficult to work out and calculate. Now, we believe for the Europa, it was worth roughly about 2 million euros to Tottenham. But again, the same occurs in the Champions League, so we would get a share of that as well, which we think would be significantly more. It's more likely to be around 6.5 million euros as well. So without having to do anything at all in the Champions League, we would get roughly about 35 million. And that includes ticket sales, that includes the prize money, and that includes the value pillar, which is formerly the coefficient. So it's a good news story there. If we were to sort of have a absolutely brilliant Champions League campaign that we're sat here this time next year, and we've done exactly the same as we have in the Europa, and we just pretty much mirror our performances, it could be worth up to 126 million.
Wow.
In terms of prize money, which is significant. That on top of the turnover that we make would probably make us one of the highest income generating clubs in the league, if not the highest. So it's absolutely fantastic. But, if we want to sort of temper that a little bit and say that we actually have a similar sort of run to what we've had previously in the Champions League, that we participate, we have a series of wins, maybe 5 wins, 2 draws, a couple of losses, and maybe bow out around the quarterfinal stage, that would still be worth, roughly speaking, about 88 million to us in terms of income. So it's not insignificant.
Wow. So just reaching the quarterfinal of the Champions League is worth more than winning the Europa League. So it sounds like playing in the group of the Champions League is similar to what you get for winning the Europa League. Lots of variances there, but roughly speaking,
it genuinely is around that, because as Nick said, you get 18.5 million just for reaching the group stage, even if you then tank out completely. Whereas the Europa League, you have to get to the finals to surpass that 18.5 million pound figure. So it's a different, the Conference League to the Europa League steps up a bit, but the Champions League, it just, absolutely leaps. So you're talking 2-3 times the revenue, at least for the Champions League.
Guys, one thing I want you to clarify before we move on to the next bit of Raj is it's all well and good forecasting this money, but that doesn't mean Spurs can just go and spend big this transfer window, right? Assuming that they're just going to get an extra £80 million hit them in terms of revenue. Oh, sorry, guys. 1 second. One second. Someone's 1 sec. Hello? Yeah, sorry. Someone here.
Just while we're waiting, fellas, I was wondering, is it possible, and I'm probably guess the answer is no, is it possible to reduce all this to one number? So like listeners can think we would have been looking at, like, if we estimate a net spend. So I think you said something, didn't you, Ben, like 125? Yeah, approximately, yeah.
It's paying 45. No.
Yeah. Cool. So guys, all this Champions League revenue sounds fantastic, but can we use it in the upcoming transfer window?
Look, the short answer is we absolutely can. And we will. How we use it is one that's always going to be open for debate. And I think it'd be a good thing for fans to talk about how they want to allocate the spending. So let's just say, for argument's sake, we're going to get an extra like 50 million from the Champions League for next year. That doesn't mean that we'll just buy one player for 50 million. There are various ways that we can do that where we've covered the way that clubs amortise transfer fees. There's also wages as well that comes into the calculation. But it will be exciting. It will be interesting. I think that the takeaway I would have is that Tottenham will definitely have more money to spend as a result of this. We have committed some money towards transfers. So we've got Vuskovic joining. We've got the Kevin Danso transfer of an obligation. We still don't know yet, as at today, what we're going to do with Matthias Tell. I still believe, so that roughly speaking, those three on the balance sheet roughly be about, that's almost like 80 million worth of transfers, give or take. But the good news is I still think there's some that we could utilise for that. I think the extra that the Europa League gives us is maybe an extra, on top of that would be an extra like 30 million on top of that as well. And then if you add another 50 million from the Champions League, probably get into the sort of area that Tottenham could potentially spend on a combination of both wages and transfer fees for players. But Ben, I don't know if you had another perspective on that.
No, I think that's right. I think the important thing to remember without going into the nuts and bolts of amortization is that, as Nick said, we've got 80 million committed. That 80 million doesn't all come out this summer, so that will be smoothed over 5 years thanks to amortization. So you're talking an additional amortization bill of 16 million a season for the next 5 years, rather than 80 million disappearing now. So what the Europa League revenue of, I think Nick, you said nearly 50 million, plus the Champions League revenue of probably guaranteed 50 million-ish does, is raises our ability to add to that sort of ongoing bill. So really continued participation in Europe is key, but that guarantees us that for these 2 financial periods. It means there's no reason you couldn't go out and spend 100 million, 150, 200 million, but it would add to your amortization bill, but that's smoothed over the next few years. So yeah, it just raises our ceiling in terms of the cost we can take on around wages and amortization, and it does mean we've got bigger spending power for this window, which is obviously welcome news.
Which is why the board will be saying, Ange, come inside. You need to show us how you're going to finish in the top 6 next season, because we need this European revenue. And if you can't do the same things you did in the Europa League and the Champions League, that league form is important to get us that consistent annual additional revenue, so we can spend more and retain ourselves at the top. But Raj, great to have you on again. And thanks again, Nick, by the way. You'll recognise Nick from being on the show before, who works in corporate finance for a large bank. Nick, your expertise is invaluable on here, so thank you very much. And this leads perfectly on to Raj. You did a brilliant episode on the lab with Flav, which is when I was so excited to reach out to you, Raj, because I thought it was brilliant. And you discussed the ownership in a lot of details, and you've worked as an economist before as well. So I'd love to understand a bit more about what you think this means for our future transfers and the squad situation itself.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jim, and it's great to be on. Been enjoying the podcast a while, and it's lovely to find some sane and calm, rational voices. Yeah, I guess here's the thing, right? So obviously winning the Europa League was amazing. We've all been on a massive high, and there's this initial exhilaration about let's get this person, let's get this person, let's get this person. And what I've been doing is sitting down, looking at our squad and working out, okay, where do we need to upgrade? But also, obviously, Champions League is exciting, but it comes with a whole bunch of restrictions in terms of how many spaces we've got in the squad, depending on homegrown, club-grown, and so on. And the rules here are quite complicated, and I'm not sure everybody has fully got their heads around it, because, frankly, it's all a bit tight and a bit difficult. So let me just explain, right? in the Europa squad already this year, we already had some problems where we couldn't fit in, say, Kinski. We already couldn't fit in Spence, and I think people knew that. So what's going to happen is if we want to bring in all these new players that everyone's excited to bring in, the fact is we've got to move quite a few people out. And we're going to have to move some people out that maybe people weren't expecting. And even then, we might not be registering some players, which might be a bit of a surprise for people. So let's start with roughly what I think is an emerging consensus about what the squad needs. I think everybody seems to be saying online something like 5 or 6 transfers, maybe up to 7. Seems about right to me. If you put our squad on a spreadsheet and map out, or here's our first choice, here's a backup, and you want a mix of age profiles, that seems about right. I think most of us expect Richarlison to be moved on, and Bissouma, and probably Ben Davies, and then maybe a couple of peripheral players that like Solomon and Brian Hill and so on, right? That's fine. And that makes room for a second striker to support Solanke. It makes room for a new left back, new left centre back, and so on. And ideally a new number 6, right? All great. We can all have fun fantasizing about that. However, let's take a player like Son. Obviously, we all love Son. I think like watching him lift the trophy is what made it so special, part of what made it so special. But we've also got to be thinking this guy is in his 30s. He seems to be struggling to produce, and he's going to be taking up one of the non-homegrown spots in the Champions League. Is that something we can afford to have just for one more year, really just for sentimentality? Or do we now, with 1 year left on his contract, sell him and then invest in somebody else for the future? Now, those are the sorts of questions I think we need to think about, because I think as it stands, without any sales so far, for the non-homegrown slots, we've got 20 players and you're only allowed 17. So even if we move on Davies, Bissouma and Richarlison, we've still got a problem where we've got too many. I think it's quite likely that Vuskovic will come in. We won't register him in the Champions League. I think that's likely to with Dragutin because he's got an injury, and who knows if we're going to move him on and we're going to replace another centre back. But I even think if Kulusevski, his injury is going to take a little while, isn't it, to recover from. It might be that we don't even register him in order to make room for these new signings that we want to come in. So really the headlines are, it's all great looking at a few big players that you want, but there are restrictions on it. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if we do go for somebody like Kyle Walker-Peters on a free, who can play a bit of left back, bit of right back. Not the ideal solution, but he counts as club trained and would actually like fit within the rules. So the summary is, I think, yeah, sure, 5 to 6 signings. It's really exciting to hear that we've got a similar amount of money to commit on net spend that we've been doing the last couple of years, thanks to the win. But it's not easy as just buying anybody that you want because of Champions League restrictions.
And that's it, like you've summarised there. So it's 17 players you can register who are not homegrown or club grown. And as currently we have 20 senior players who are within that bracket. So as you said, 3 need to go. I'm assuming that's right. And even if you said that's Reguilon, Ben Davies and Richarlison, great. Now you're just down to still needing to offload 1 in, 1 out, even with them all gone. So it gets quite complicated. And that's why maybe people will say, yeah, but why would you get rid of Son? He's still got 10 goals in his locker, that experience, etc. Well, it's not. Ideally, you would keep him and you'd have another player on top. But we're at a point of it is 1 in, 1 out, and you do need to be brutal. If you're not, it's not going to be him. It can't be Mikey Moore because he's not taking up one of those spots anyway. It's got to be a Bissouma. It's got to be a Son. It's got to be. Or do you instead want to go for a Bentancur or a Porro? Like, these are huge decisions. Like, you don't want to offload Porro. You don't want to offload Bentancur. So who's it going to be? It's got to be someone. I think people just assume, like you said, Raj, we can just go and go, here's 5 or 6 players. We can go get them, but they can't play unless someone else steps out the squad. And once you're in that last 17, there are some really good players in there. You're not going to take out Van de Ven, Romero, Danso, Vicario, Udogi. We had to, and this is why I think people don't realise, why was Spence not in the squad before? It's a complicated situation that we find ourselves in, which has been amplified from several years of not planning ahead enough with transfers, has meant we haven't been able to leverage the club-grown and homegrown quotas properly. So outside of that 17, we've got spots for club-grown and homegrown, When your club-grown players are Alfie Whiteman, Brandon Austin, and your homegrown players are people like Fraser Forster, those spots are largely may as well be empty, dare I say, in some cases. So unless we raise the profile of player in that category, and buying homegrown is extremely expensive, and buying club-grown takes a 3-year planning because you need to buy them at a very young age and get them to club-grown by playing them for 3 years and registering them for 3 years. Sorry, it's not an easy fix. It's going to take time. And in the meantime, you need to be brutal with those homegrown players. You have to have 17 of the best.
And it looks like we have been doing something about this, but it's, as you said, it takes time for this strategy to pay off. So we did bring in a bunch of homegrown players, and that's great. And that sort of satisfied the Premier League restrictions, and we're totally fine there. But in Europe, it's this club-trained one. As you said, the only one that we've got down here is Austin, and I've put in brackets down the bottom, maybe Dane Scarlett. But, I mean, we all like Dane Scarlett, but he's not even been destroying it in the Championship, really. So are you really comfortable bringing him on the Champions League? We all hope it works out. You've maybe got people like Devine, who seems to have had a good loan, and obviously Mikey Moore. But, again, how confident are you bringing these guys on in Champions League competition? Is challenging. Couple of things that are making this problem better next year. And thanks a lot to Matt Slade, who we found on Twitter, who's done a lot of this analysis and like great amount of detail, brilliant stuff. He's made a spreadsheet we can all go and look at. But Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall next year, we can take them out of our non-homegrown list. It's complicated why Archie Gray is there because our association grown one is full. But those two can move over onto List B, which is unlimited. So under 21s, been with the club for a couple of years. That's great. But yeah, and we also seem to have invested more in our academy players, and we're paying them more so they stick around, the ones who are going to be good enough to play for us in first team football. But as it stands this year, it's pretty tight. And so either it means losing a couple of players we didn't expect to, or perhaps bringing in some of these big name signings that we want, but they might only be able to play in the Premier League. And then other players might play in the Champions League. So that's a complicated puzzle to solve, I think.
The other, correct me wrong, Rose, but under-18s don't have to be registered at all, right? So this is again why people are frustrated by the heavy approach on youth last season, but it feels like that's a little bit of it's a reaction to foreseeing the problem of we don't do it now and we don't continue to do it. If we go all in on senior players this window and we don't continue with that churn of these young players who are gradually building towards the homegrown status like Bergvall and Gray, you're just kicking this problem back further and further and further. What a club like Liverpool's done really well is they've got this balance of adding a couple of experienced players every window, really nurturing those youth players with good loans and good first team experience. So those homegrown and club-grown quotas are always brimming with very talented individuals who don't feel like they're in the spot just because they're club-grown or homegrown. They're there because they're good footballers. Whereas we're not in that situation because we haven't planned kind of ahead enough for that.
That's right, yeah. The List B is if they're under 21, but they've been at Spurs for 2 years, and that's unlimited. So Bergvall and Gray will get to move to that list next season if we're in European competition, hopefully. But this year, yeah, it's sparse. And so we might look at, Devine's had a good loan, Donnelly, and that's great. I mean, we'll see what they look like pre-season, but I would be surprised if we're relying on them in Champions League. That's just a big ask for them, isn't it?
It is. Well, look, thanks so much, guys. Is there any final comments, or are we good to wrap up there? We're all good?
No, me, Jim.
Well, look, thanks, guys. This is going to be a series we hopefully continue as a regular thing with the show. I think we're going to call it more of kind of a numbers focused series, not always just finance, but just looking at the data like Raj has covered today with the squad allocations and things like that. These are really important facts that we need to understand as fans to truly understand why the club's making decisions like they are sometimes. And I think it creates a healthier environment amongst us fans when we're all getting a clear understanding of why football clubs do things that often from the outside really make you scratch your head. But to having your expertise, Nick, Raj and Ben is really, really helping. So thanks, guys. And up the Spurs.
Spurs.
Cheers, Jim.
Sick podcasts and football shows that are just a bunch of people spouting opinions with no substance. It's always toxic negativity. It's toxic positivity. There's no substance. You don't come out of it feeling like you've learned anything new. Well, that's why we created Oh So Spurs. It's the Thinking Fans podcast. I'm Jim and I'm the host, but I am only a sum of many brilliant parts. We have A-licensed coaches like JJ to help us dissect how games changed and how coaches are adapting. We have people who work in finance to tell us how much can Spurs actually spend and why we don't leave it all down to opinions when we discuss these things. We always look for the facts. We go and search long and hard to find people who've actually worked at Spurs. We talk to ex-coaches from Tottenham. We talk to ex-coaches from players we've recently signed to get you a deeper level look into them than you're going to get on a typical show on the internet. But we depend on our members to get this kind of content. To raise the bar and provide you with higher quality content, we need to find a revenue stream that is sustainable for us. And that is where you come in as members. You are the lifeblood of our show. We all do this for free as members of the show, and we need the money to survive and keep it running. So if you would like to be a member, we will promise you back an extra 2 videos per week as a minimum, and first access to our daily videos that come out as well, alongside other things like access to our WhatsApp groups where you will find those 8 licensed coaches and those finance experts and the rest of the panel to have a chat to about Spurs. So welcome to the show, and I hope you get all you're looking for and you like to stick around. Up the Spurs.